Hi, I'm Richard Llewellyn from Bioresources. This little video is a follow-on from the previous one about the insectaries in macadamias. That sort of project and interest has morphed into an interest in cover cropping in a more general sense, and in particular in macadamias. We think that we can achieve quite a lot of our aims using cover crops, but there are many technical and logistic and environmental issues that need to be attended to make it successful. But if it can be pulled off, it has all sorts of benefits, not only for beneficial insects, but soil health, compaction, runoff, carbon sequestration. So there are many benefits if you can and get it going on your farm, but not all farms will be able to do it. But anyway, I'll run through some of the things that are important in making a decision whether you tackle this or not. We've been trying to bring together various threads of information, experience of growers and consultants to get the discussion and experimentation going in cover cropping, in particular in macadamias, trying to find out how we can use this technology in macadamias. It's got lots of benefits, but invariably we're asked right up front, what should we plant? And this is not such a simple question. You need to look at all the various issues before you can make such a decision. Here's a simple list of some of the things that have to be considered. I'll talk about them briefly in the next section. The first thing to consider is the season, really. If you're got a young orchard and you could potentially plant all year round, you still have to select the appropriate seeds for this time of year. So that's a first important consideration. The crop age, which will obviously influence how much light is available to the plant. Some plants, as we know, are not very shade tolerant. Others are more tolerant. Others will do very good in full sun in a young crop. So that's another consideration. The soil type, soils, as you know, can range from very sandy and dry to, more to compacted soils, to more open soils. So that will influence the type of machinery you're going to use and how you can work the seed into that soil, how tolerant they can be of drying out, etc. Obviously, rainfall is a key factor, probably the key factor. Northern New South Wales has a relatively reliable rainfall, except for last year, of course. But in a lot of Queensland, the conditions are very dry for long periods of time, and it could be quite difficult to get a cover crop going. Maybe a spring planted crop is more likely to have more chance. But other people are looking at mini sprinklers, modifying their mini sprinklers, or perhaps putting mini sprinklers into young orchards before they normally would. And potentially temporary overhead sprinklers to get crops going. Perhaps small travelling irrigators have a place in this system. Also, the condition of the soil or the interrow itself, how much vegetation's there already. It may be quite bare, it might be sandy, it might have just been contoured. So, or it might have some clumpy grasses that are going to be challenging for seeders. So that will influence what type of equipment you might need for soil preparation. To get the best establishment of the seed, you don't want too much competition. So it may involve a very close mow, or even a little bit of cultivation with a rotary cultivator or a rotary hoe. The first planting may well be the most difficult. Once a cover crop does get established, it can have an influence on the soil and the ease of subsequent planting of subsequent crops. Various seeders are available. There's linkage spinners, there's electric spinners, there's also aerators with seed boxes on them. But we purchased a double disc seeder a few years ago, and we found it very effective as long as the ground wasn't too hard or the trash too deep. It drops the seed pretty accurately into the soil without causing too much disturbance. And we think this technique has got a lot of promise. The next thing to consider is what plans you have for the crop once it is mature. There's a lot of organic matter in a mature crop, and it needs to be managed somehow. It's either cut down, slashed down, or incorporated in the soil. All these things will depend on the age of the crop and what you're actually trying to do. Things like sunflowers and sorghum will take a lot more breaking down than something like vetch and rye, which will break down very quickly. So this needs to be thought about in advance, how you're going to handle all this material. If you have a crimper roller, not many people do, you can handle very heavy trash, and then you can plant another crop in behind it. So there are many things to consider, and then even consider the following years. You know, what's your program for this block? As I said a couple of years ago, we purchased a disc planter to try and experiment and engage with all these issues and try and get some experience on doing that. We were able to plant some insectary strips a couple of years ago, and we did plant a crop in the middle of last year, and then it went dry for 6 months. But it was interesting how it was still able to grow and produce pollen and had lots of beneficial insects in it. So subsequently, early this year, we did plant a lot more insectary crops, and these have been incredibly successful. The farm we've been doing these experiments has a very good surface. It already has a really fairly high organic content, and we were able to either cut the grass very close before planting, or even did a little bit of cultivating in some areas. So the seed bed was good. We found the seeder we had was very adequate and did a great job under these conditions. This was a very successful planting that was slashed down in September, and it was allowed to regrow, and now in mid-November there are more flowers appearing and lots of different grasses. Here's a list of some of the seeds that are suitable for insectaries and cover crops. They all have their strengths and seasonal preferences. Some will break down very quickly, others will take much more to break down and sequester more carbon if they managed appropriately. As far as what seeds to plant, there's a whole lot of different combinations you can use depending on what the aim is that you're chasing, or you might want a whole combination of things. But certainly for beneficials, you want flowering and nectar producing plants, so there's a whole range of those that I can talk about later. But for nitrogen, obviously you've got legumes, you've got woolly pod vetch, lucerne, various field peas, etc. Organic matter, you've got grains like sorghum and oats, sunflowers. All these provide a lot of organic matter, and certainly for breaking up compaction, things like tillage radish. There's various versions of tillage radish. There's some deep-rooted legumes. So you might end up with a combination of those. Of course, you need to avoid selecting plants that could be hosts for some of your pests. Dolichos lablab is one that we're very wary of, as it can be a host for green vegetable bug. generally there's two planting times per year. One is sort of around April, May for winter crops, and then in August, September for summer crops. But there are lots of warm weather species that you can plant right through until February. Coming back to some of the plants that are good for beneficial insects that provide flowers, nectar and pollen. One that we're struck with and we want to do more with is buckwheat. It's a small flower, attractive to lots of small parasitoids and tiny flies and things. It's very fast to develop. It only takes 5 or 6 weeks to produce a flower. The others of great interest are woolly pod vetch. Once again, provides flower resources, but also fixes a lot of nitrogen, grows very quickly, and is a great addition. Brassicas, various brassicas, when they come to flower, are attractive to lots of beneficial insects, including native bees, things like tillage radish, mustards, rocket, and the like, are all great. There are also quite a few perennial herbs that are good, or not, some of them not so perennial, but parsley, broadleaf parsley, dill, basil, chicory, plantain. These are all very attractive to beneficial insects. Cosmos is another one, and Queen Anne's lace, if you can get it going, is fantastic for beneficial insects and pollinators. These semi-perennial herbs and flowers like salvia, which are incredibly attractive to pollinators, may be more suitable for planting on the headlands or where rows have been removed. A lot of farms have patches of clover. This is perhaps underutilised, and if it's planted more deliberately, the right species, some species are tolerant to semi-shade. The native ground cover dichondra is also perhaps underutilised. It looks like it's got a lot of potential in the tree line. It's quite tolerant to heavy shade, and it can tolerate sweeping from machinery. Some of the grasses are great too. Annual rye produces pollen very quickly. Prairie grass, they're great for lacewings, green lacewings. Apart from planting cover crops within the farm rows, there are opportunities to plant other shrubs and small trees around the edges of the plantations and within plantations where space permits. Things like native leptospermums, callistemons, grevilleas. There are also lots of exotic plants and shrubs that are great providers of pollen and nectar for predators and parasitoids and insectivorous birds. But I'll leave that for another video. Many thanks again to Maurice Collins for some great film clips, and of course to our research team and to the various farms that are collaborating with our project. We have just started 2 land care projects. One looks at the development of cover crops in a crop in New South Wales where alternative rows have been removed, looking at changes in the soil and insect life in that farm. The other one is in a young farm, a newly planted farm in the Bundaberg area, looking at cover crops to improve soil and water penetration, and down the track to help with beneficial insects. So we look forward to bringing you more information about those and the progress of those projects.